topic for the today's webinar is current account and capital account transactions under FEMA and related issues. Welcome Manojji for the on the JB Nagar TP Study Circle platform. I thank you CA Manoj Shah for accepting our invitation, for sharing his vast knowledge and experience on the subject. I now request CA Vijayta Jaiswal, core group member of JB Nagar Study Circle, to introduce the speaker.
Hello everybody, it's welcome to all and good evening. CA Manoj Shah is a qualified chartered accountant since 1987, and he is also a partner and founder partner of the firm Shah and Moji Chartered Accountants. His focus area of practice are exchange control regulations, FEMA, international taxation and transfer pricing. He is past president of the Chamber of Tax Consultants and past president of CVO CA Association. Presently, he is assistant editor of the monthly journal of the Chamber, the Chambers Journal. He contributes to FEMA Update column of newsletter published by WRC of ICI and to the journal published by the ICI New Delhi. His contribution to publications include many articles like International Taxation, a compendium, FEMA, referencer of WRC, referencer of FEMA, a publication of ICI. He is also the co-author of publication Tax Withholding from Payments to Non-Residents published by the Chamber of Tax Consultants. He is also a technical reviewer of publications titled FEMA Compounding Orders, a Comprehensive Analysis. He has delivered talks on FEMA and non-residential taxation at seminars.
Before we move on to the proper topic of the day, that is capital and current account transaction, I thought it fit that probably many of you might be new to the subject, in the sense that probably one of us, few of us may not have got the conceptual understanding of FEMA. And therefore, I'll be briefing FEMA, taking the kind of FEMA overview, the structure of FEMA for around 5 to 10 minutes. And thereafter, we'll move on to proper subject, that is of current and capital account transaction. First, we shall be taking capital account transaction and then the current account transaction. And in between also, if there are any queries based on the protocol of the study circle, I am okay with answering the questions in between also. And there are few questions which have been sent to me in advance, and I'll be dealing after the presentation is over. So typically, one finds it very difficult to comprehend FEMA because it is slightly differently structured, like other regulatory laws, probably which is more or less regulated by circulars and notifications, is a case with FEMA also. And therefore, let's look at the structure of FEMA firstly. The FEMA is an act which has got only 49 sections. And out of 49 sections, there are very few sections which are substantial, so to say. Rest are majority of the sections are quite procedural and administrative. It applies to whole of India and to all the branches, offices, and agencies outside India which are owned or controlled by a person resident in India. So basically, it even applies to the branches of Indian entities, Indian companies, or even proprietor or partnership firm which has got offices overseas. It has a 49 section, as I mentioned, and 1 to 9 are quite substantive. The newly introduced section, which is section 37A, and which is a very harsh provision, and it gives a power to seize the value of equivalent Indian assets for the assets which are held overseas. And that is where one will have to be careful, in the sense that I'll take up a practical case study here where the genuine transaction of gift of homework property overseas could have had implication of section 37A. So genuine transaction can also face some sort of serious issue, and therefore one has to be aware of this section also. Then you have section 46, which grants power to central government to make rules to carry out the provisions of FEMA. And section 47 grants power to RBI to make regulations to implement this provision and the rules made thereunder. So basically, between central government and the Reserve Bank, the section 46 and 47 gives power them to make rules. And there have been few areas where central government is active in FEMA, in the sense that these days, nowadays, from October 19 onwards, the capital account transaction, the power to frame rules have been shifted to central government from Reserve Bank, and Reserve Bank is now only given power to regulate non-capital or non-equity, or you can say only debt-related capital account transaction. While there is a shift in the power to make rules, but the administration is still with the Reserve Bank of India, and it is the nodal agency which administers the FEMA. Looking at the structure of FEMA, you have FEMA Foreign Exchange Management Act, then you have notification, then as I mentioned, you have rules, you have master directions, you have APDR circulars, and you have FAQs. So these are the 6 subset of notifications, regulations, or you can say statute is divided into these 6 parameters, and therefore at times it becomes very difficult for a newcomer to comprehend FEMA. This is the overview of the sections which we have already seen. Basically, section 3 to 9. 2 as such is a definition section. Any statute usually will have section 2 which gives a definition. Now, these definitions are contained in Foreign Exchange Management Act. And then as we proceed further, you will notice that there are notifications also and there are circulars also. The some of the terms which are not defined in the notification, one will have to draw meaning from FEMA Act itself. Then you have section 3 to 9, which says that provisions related to regulations and management of foreign exchange. You have section 10 to 12, which is dealing with authorized person. Basically, authorized person are the person who are allowed to deal in foreign exchange. 13 to 15 deals with contraventions and penalties, and 16 to 30 deals with appeal matters, and 39 to 49 is on disciplines. Now, what are the notifications under FEMA? So basically, RBI had initially issued 25 notifications covering the capital account transaction, and that was in 1999 when FEMA was introduced. Out of these 25 notifications, 15 related to capital account transaction, 1 on export of goods, and 9 were for other regulations. Now, these original notifications, which were 25 in number, had undergone many changes, and therefore RBI thought of repealing the old one and introducing the new, altogether a new set of notifications. And these are notifications which are now added the suffix R to denote that these are completely revamped or revised notifications. And this is where it is 3R, 5R, 6, likewise there are notifications. So these are the 15 notifications.
We were talking about the notifications, and the notifications, as I mentioned, they've undergone change and are 25, originally were 25, and nowadays we have got 15 revised notifications. These notifications are nothing but most of the notifications, as I mentioned, are dealing with capital account transactions. So if one has to draw an analogy with Income Tax Act, say for example, we have separate chapter on capital gain, or we have separate chapter for income from other sources, or we have separate chapter from TDS. Likewise, instead of putting all the notifications in the FEMA Act itself, the Reserve Bank thought it fit to carve out notifications, and these notifications are in a way kind of self-contained code. So if you look at the notifications dealing with external commercial borrowing, which is again a notification 3R, which is this notification 3R, and this notification 3R is nothing but it deals with entire spectrum of borrowing and lending regulations. So likewise, we have got the notifications, and in addition to these notifications, Reserve Bank comes out with master directions. Initially, these master directions were known as master circulars. And the 1st July was the date when Reserve Bank used to come out with master circulars. But this has been given a go by. And now we have master directions in place of master circular. And therefore, master directions are nothing but kind of a compilation on a subject. Say, for example, if you are dealing with foreign currency borrowing, that is external commercial borrowing, we will have a master directions on external commercial borrowing. And what is the need for master directions and APDR circular? We now move on to other slide where you will find that this is APDR circular. So what is APDR? APDR circular is nothing but authorized person's directions. So basically Reserve Bank delegates power to authorized person to deal in foreign exchange. And these authorized persons are the only authorized person who can deal in foreign exchange. India is still not a convertible country or capital account convertible country or currency convertible country. Therefore, foreign exchange, one has to go to authorized person who are appointed by Reserve Bank of India. So basically, Reserve Bank issues directions to this authorized person, who in turn see that FEMA regulations are complied with, and it is the obligation of authorized person also to see that whatever transactions they undertake, and the clients or the constituents who are like corporates or even individuals, whoever have to deal in foreign exchange, they will have to go to authorized persons to buy or sell foreign exchange. So you have APDI circular and you have master direction. These two are the directions which one has to comply with. APDI circular, FEMA, see, what is the need for APDI circular? APDI circular, because FEMA is a very dynamic law in the sense that it has to deal with economic changes also. Unlike income tax or say for GST, where you have substantial changes which takes place only once a year, say for example, 1st February is the date when you have finance bill being announced every year. You cannot have such situations under FEMA, because FEMA has to deal with the economic changes, and India being part of a global economy, India is now almost kind of an opened up economy. Therefore, whatever are the changes taking place in foreign exchange, which has got impact, Reserve Bank will have to come out with even substantial changes, and therefore they come out with APDI circular, which immediately on a kind of real-time basis gets updated in the master direction. So if you open or go to RBI site and you open any master direction, you will find that it's kind of updated. Moment there is a APDI circular amending, as we continue with our example of foreign currency borrowing, the master directions also get updated. And these circulars have got a legal support. They are the even equally binding on the person undertaking foreign exchange transaction. There is a case law to say that these circulars are legally valid document, and one has to comply with this APDI circular also. Contravention of this circular can also lead to penal consequences. Unlike income tax, where circulars are not binding on taxpayer or assessee, this is not the case under FEMA. Now we move on to subject of capital and current account transaction. Basically, capital and current account transaction is the heart of FEMA, and if there is a conceptual understanding of this transaction in the nature of capital and current, I think the application of FEMA or understanding the problem under FEMA will be far more easier. So just to give you a background, concept of capital and current account transaction were not there in FERA, the predecessor law to FEMA. It was not there. In fact, every drawal of foreign exchange, one had to go to Reserve Bank of India for approval. In the 1980s, when Narayan Murthy wanted to buy first computer and he wanted to import, I think he had to go to RBI, and he says it took around 60 days for RBI to release foreign exchange. So those were the days, pre 92, when India was a very closed economy, and the FERA was there, and there was no concept of capital and current account transaction. The drawal was regulated by foreign exchange, as I mentioned, and even after the introduction of new industrial policy, when India opened up its economy, the FEMA still took some 7 years to come out or see the light of the day. And till 91 to 99 also, FERA was there with a lot of relaxation, but basically there was no concept of capital and current account transaction. And capital and current account are economic concept and not an accounting concept. So for example, if you are from accountant's perspective, an Indian company, for example, is importing a machinery. For accounting purposes, it will be a capital account transaction, but from FEMA perspective, it will be a current account transaction, and we shall see how. So FEMA structure dealing with capital account transaction. So there are sections 6.1, 6.2a and 6.3. These are the three sections which deal with capital account transaction. For paucity of time, I'll not go into the detail of this, but basically, as I mentioned, the powers have already been delegated to central government now to deal with capital account transaction. That is what is captured in 6.2a. Capital account transactions are basically now, as I told you, Reserve Bank of India only has to deal with that instrument, and all other powers are with central government. Now, this is very, very, very important one has to bear in mind. I'm on the second bullet. From section 6.1, if you read section 6.1, it is saying here, subject to the provisions of subsection 2, any person may sell or draw foreign exchange to or from an authorized person for a capital account transaction. So therefore, if one has to invest overseas, or if non-resident has to invest in India, or an Indian resident has to invest overseas, and if he wants foreign exchange, basically one has to go to authorized person. And here is a section 3A. That is what I wanted you to just draw your attention. It prohibits, section 3A is prohibits dealing in or transferring of any foreign exchange to any person other than by authorized person. And if if one deals in foreign exchange without having recourse to authorized person, it will lead to contravention, and contravention of 3A is not even compoundable, in the sense that one will have to directly face the enforcement directorate proceedings. Basically 3A will deal with hawala kind of situation, because an Indian resident is dealing in foreign exchange without one of the party being authorized dealer. If I have, for example, I have traveled to I have traveled abroad and I bought a foreign exchange from authorized dealer for my travel quota. Having done that, when I come back and return India, instead of surrendering the foreign exchange, and I give it to my friend because he is also now wants to travel, and I exchange rupee in exchange of that, that will lead to dealing in foreign exchange, and that is a contravention of 3A. So this is where one has to bear in mind that the principle is, the thumb rule is that one of the party to the foreign exchange transaction should be authorized dealer. Now let's look at the definition of capital account transaction. Capital account transaction means a transaction which alters assets or liabilities, including contingent liabilities outside India of person resident in India, or assets and liabilities in India of person resident outside India, and includes transaction referred to in section 3, subsection 3 of section 6. So basically we are dealing with a transaction which has an impact on altering assets or liabilities, including contingent liabilities outside India of person resident in India. So any transaction which has the impact of creating asset overseas or liability overseas for a resident in India, it will amount to capital account transaction. So for example, say for example, Tata Steel acquired Chorus in Europe in 2009, or whatever the year is, that will be regarded as a capital account transaction, because you are acquiring or you are creating an asset overseas. You are acquiring a company and thereby you are creating a overseas direct investment, and which is a capital account transaction. And as I mentioned in earlier example, if an importer in India imports some machinery, that will not be a capital account transaction, because you have not created any asset overseas. Even if you say from accounting perspective, it is a capital account transaction, still the asset is in India and not outside India. Similarly, vice versa, if non-resident is creating asset or liabilities in India, it will amount to capital account transaction for non-resident. And section 6.3 basically lists down all the capital account transactions. So there are A, B, C, D, you can see up to I. So these are the basically transactions are given for which there are notifications. So for example, transfer or issue of any security by person resident in India, transfer or issue of any security by person resident outside India. So, or borrowing and lending. So basically equity investment, debt investment, buying of immovable property, for example, transfer of immovable property. Look at item H. Transfer of immovable property outside India, or acquisition of transfer of immovable property in India. These are the type of transaction which will be regarded as a capital account transaction. And whatever is this A to I, the subsection, I mean the segments of section 6.3 are there. For every such transaction, there is a notification. And you have one more item which is giving of a guarantee. That is basically contingent liability. If resident is giving a guarantee in favor of non-resident, that is also called a capital account transaction. And once one has to bear in mind that if transaction is in the nature of capital account transaction, there will be a notification. One has to see that he complies with every item of the notification. Basically, it is a self-contained code, and one will have to follow the entire notification in totality. And this is the list of notifications. So for example, you have notification 3, which I have already mentioned. It is about borrowing and lending in foreign currency. Then you have NRE, NRO deposits. You have notification 5R. Then you have notification 7R, which deals with acquisition of property overseas by resident Indian. Then you have notification 8 dealing with guarantee. You have notification 12R, which deals with insurance policies. Remittance of asset, the popularly scheme which is known as a $1 million scheme, where non-resident Indian and overseas citizen of India, when they repatriate funds from India, which is known as a remittance of asset, which is notification 13R. Then you have overseas direct investment, which I mentioned about Tata acquiring Chorus. You have notification 120. acquisition and transfer of immovable property in India. Now this is 21R, but now it is embedded in, as I told you, the power to deal with capital account transactions have been shifted to central government. So 21R is no more valid, and now the non-debt instrument rules will have some reference over in later slides, which governs the now acquisition and transfer of immovable property. So likewise, there are notifications, and every notification will deal with capital account transaction. Just to give you a further understanding of capital account and make the concept clear, what happens if we use the credit card, if we go overseas and swipe the card? Now, does it lead to a borrowing, and therefore is it in the nature of capital account transaction? And the notification 3 and regulation 3 says that use of credit card in India by person resident outside India or outside India by person resident in India shall not be deemed as a borrowing or lending in Indian rupee or foreign exchange, and therefore they have made it clear by way of explanation to say that use of credit card will not amount to capital account transaction. So you have 30 days limit or whatever time limit to clear your dues which you have spent on credit card, but still it will not be regarded as a capital account transaction in the form of a borrowing in foreign exchange. Now we'll spend few moments on guarantee, and before there are practical questions which I'll be taking up in the already questions which are sent. But this is something very interesting, and I want you to understand this also very thoroughly, and it also can give some idea about how to raise borrowing in India without there being any compliance or by way of guarantee. So though if you look at the definition of capital account transaction, it says that guarantee by person resident outside India is not covered in the scope of capital account transaction if one goes by the definition. I just take you back to this definition. See, let us read this. Capital account transaction means a transaction which alters the asset or liabilities, including contingent liability outside India of person resident in India. Now, if you look at the second bullet, the including contingent liability is absent. So this second bullet deals with non-resident. So when non-resident are acting as a guarantor, basically it does not have any impact. And if you go strictly by the interpretation of definition, if non-resident is acting as a guarantor or stands as a guarantor, it will not amount to capital account transaction. However, it is not the case because the notification 1, which deals with permissible capital account transaction, and even section 6.3 list out that even non-resident, when it acts as a guarantor, it amounts to capital account transaction. But if you really go by the lawyer's mind, one would argue that it is not at all a capital account transaction. So when non-resident is acting as a guarantor, there is no reporting because it is not mentioned in anywhere in the regulation, and therefore he can act as a guarantor. Now, if suppose there is a company in India and which wants to borrow money, so it is a subsidiary of a foreign company. Say for example, Microsoft India Private Limited is a subsidiary, wholly owned subsidiary of Microsoft US. Microsoft India Private Limited wants to borrow money. Now, if it wants to borrow money, it will have to, and sub parent will lend the money, but it will have to follow the entire regulations of external commercial borrowing, foreign currency term loan, so to say. And this regulations has got its own limitations and on checks and balances. And therefore, if you are in urgent need of funds, Microsoft US says, let me act as a guarantor. So maybe whatever may be the scheme under, suppose for example, Microsoft US places a FD with Citibank US. Citibank US in turn, on the basis of this guarantee, ask Citibank India to lend money to Microsoft India Private Limited. Now, based on the guarantee of Microsoft US through that FD, Indian Citibank branch is giving loan to Microsoft India Private Limited. Now, if you look at the transaction of borrowing by Microsoft India Private Limited, it is a rupee transaction because Citibank is lending in rupee, and therefore there is no implication of foreign exchange. So in this case, the transaction of borrowing by Microsoft India Private Limited is purely a rupee transaction, not having any impact in terms of FEMA. And this is what is kind of confirmed by the definition, the borrowing and lending master direction also, that this is permissible transaction. Now assume for a while that Microsoft India fails to honor the borrowing which it has taken from Citibank India. Now, so there will be invocation of guarantee because Citibank, Microsoft India is failed to pay, and therefore there will be invocation of guarantee whereby now instead of Citibank India acting, being a creditor, now in the books of Indian company, the creditor will be Microsoft parent company because it has honored the liability and it has fulfilled the obligation of Microsoft India. And that is what the even FEMA recognizes, that in such cases, if Indian borrower ultimately has to now replace the creditor with the Indian creditor, which was earlier Citibank, now you have to replace with Microsoft US, it is doable. And even you can remit foreign exchange, but equivalent to the amount of Indian borrowing. So for example, if 100 crore was borrowed money, and on that 5 crore was, say for example, outstanding interest. So if it is 105 crore, and sum equal to 105 crore can be remitted to Citibank US, but not equivalent dollar. For 105 crore, for example, if 1 lakh or 10 lakh, $1 million, say $10 million have been remitted by Citibank US, Microsoft parent, you cannot remit foreign exchange. Basically, the exchange risk will be borne by non-resident. The equivalent amount of Indian rupees can be replaced. So in case when you are looking at borrowing options for an Indian company, many times we see that, parent is not very keen to contribute equity capital to the company because you are coming out with very large amount of equity. ECB is sometimes not possible. In such circumstances, this guarantee route can be adopted by Indian company having a foreign parent or foreign joint venture, and the transaction will be a rupee transaction, and it is a fully permissible transaction. And master direction on external commercial borrowing and trade credit does refer to this sort of structural debt, and it is, I've mentioned the para also, para number 19, which deals with this aspect. Now let's look at some of the transaction, and let's try to understand what is the nature of transaction and what are the regulations dealing with it. For example, the gift of sum of money by resident to non-resident. A resident father wants to, for example, give a gift of money to his son who is studying abroad or who is settled abroad. And what is the nature of this transaction? So if it is a gift of sum of money, if you go by the definition, when money is transmitted by a father from India to his son, he is not creating any asset overseas, nor does the son creates any asset or liabilities in India. So therefore, gift of sum of money is a current account transaction. And subject to the limit of liberalized remittance scheme, LRS, as many of us would be knowing, $250,000 is the limit. And if it is a sum of money, it is a current account transaction, freely doable transaction. Now let's look at some of the other transaction, and this will give an interesting scenarios. So gift of foreign security. Naturally, if the foreign security is gifted, it is resulting into capital account transaction in the sense that it results into creation of asset overseas. So let's look at the probable options now. So for example, donor is a non-resident and recipient or donee is a resident. So non-resident is gifting foreign security to a resident. So this is a permissible transaction, and notification 120, when I'm looking at regulation 2211 of 120, the 120 deals is the notification. As I told you, every capital account transaction has a notification. This is an overseas direct investment. Basically, by virtue of a gift, resident will now have foreign currency asset or asset overseas, and therefore it's a capital account transaction. Once it is a capital account transaction, one has to see whether it is permissible or permissible with RBI approval, or it is not permissible at all. These are the three options. Here we have a case where it says it is permissible in terms of regulation 2211. In fact, the Flipkart deal which took place was, I think, kind of this type of situation where Indian promoters were gifted shares of a Singapore company, and that only to the tune of 50,000 rupees. And later on, the venture fund and the big investor, big private equity investor, they pumped in money at huge valuation in Singapore company. So the resident received the gift and they held the shares of Singapore company, which then became a holding company. There are many nuances and issues dealing with it, but for the basic understanding or for the understanding the capital account transaction and the how to deal with an issue, one has to appreciate this aspect that gift to resident by non-resident is permissible. Let's look at interesting aspect, resident to resident. for example, an individual has invested in a foreign company, and you have established a company in UAE, Dubai, and you are holding shares of a company. You are the only shareholder of your company, and that gentleman wants to now gift his shares to his son. Because of his old age, he says that, I would like to give my shares to my son. Interestingly, this transaction is not covered under general permission, and therefore it will require prior approval of Reserve Bank of India. So if it is R2R transaction dealing with foreign currency shares or overseas shares, it is not under approval route. It is under approval route. If resident wants to gift shares of foreign company to non-resident, it is again not covered under general permission, and therefore it will require RBI approval. Whatever is not covered under general permission means it is not so that you cannot carry out the transaction. One will have to approach RBI, and in genuine cases, even permission will be granted. Let's look at inheritance now. This was a gift scenario, inheritance. Non-resident is the resident is inheriting from non-resident. It is a permissible. Again, you have regulation 22, but sub-regulations are changing. 22(1)(3) allows resident to inherit. Resident to resident, even inheritance is permissible under 22(1)(3), and resident to non-resident. There is no mention of the regulation in the sense that it is not covered general permission. But in my view, there is section 6(5) which would say that non-resident can hold this asset, and of course it is not covered under general permission. So it is better that such transaction is intimated to authorized dealer, and in turn, if authorized dealer so feels, he may write to RBI to take approval. Gift and inheritance of immovable property situated outside India. Again, immovable property acquisition would be a capital account transaction because you are creating asset overseas. And interestingly, if it is a gift of overseas property by non-resident to resident, it is not covered under general permission. One would usually find that any inbound gift where non-resident is gifting to resident, it is usually one would feel that it is under automatic route, but in case of immovable property, it is not so. And one will have to write to RBI. We had, in fact, in one of our cases, there was a non-resident Indian daughter who then became OCI because she took a UK citizenship. She married to a UK national. And later on, she being the only child, she wanted his father and parents, to come every time in vacation to UK, and therefore she bought a house. And later on, she gifted that house when the father and mother were in UK. They entered into a gift deed and they registered the document in UK. Later on, upon arrival to India, when we look at this provision and they came to us, we found that this is not covered under general permission, and therefore we wrote to RBI. We took the post facto approval. The RBI granted post facto approval subject to the father coming for compounding, and we had to compound the contravention. And it is always better to compound the contravention because, as I mentioned, section 37A of FEMA. This is the case where in a genuine transaction, if it is not in terms of FEMA and you are holding a foreign currency asset which is not in accordance with FEMA, the Enforcement Directorate has the power to impound equivalent amount of assets in India. And therefore, it is wherever such transactions are there, it is better to report to RBI, take the post facto approval, and get it compounded. Then gift and inheritance of immovable property situated outside India. If it is resident to resident gift, regulation 5(1)(a) for 6(4) cases and section 5(2) for notification 7R. Basically, 6(4) is a case where you are now resident, in the sense that suppose, for example, Mr. A was non-resident. He was there in US for 20 years and he came back to India in 2015. He was owning a house there and he continues to own house there. And so, for example, in 2020, he is now in India with his family and he wants to gift now this overseas house to his son. Then resident to resident gift is allowed, provided this asset was acquired. Basically, section 6(4) is a case which says that I'm dealing with 6(4) of FEMA, which says that these are the assets which he has created while he was non-resident. So 6(4) deals with the situations where person was non-resident and now he is resident. So whatever are the assets which are held overseas in terms of it could be house, or it could be bank balance, or it could be equity shares, or any assets, you can continue to own the asset. You need not liquidate the assets, and therefore such a house is gifted, and in 6(4) cases it is permissible. If resident wants to gift immovable property to non-resident, that gentleman will have to go to RBI and seek approval. The approval for immovable property will be governed by New Delhi office of Reserve Bank, because immovable property division is now shifted to New Delhi. In terms of section 4 of FEMA 99, foreign exchange, foreign security, or any overseas immovable property must be held as per permissible modes. As I mentioned, one has to be very, very careful that, whatever assets you are holding in foreign currency, it is as per the permissible modes. Otherwise, you have section 13(1)(a), which has a penalty, and as I mentioned, seizure of equal assets in India. This is one more way of gifting the transaction, that is settling of property in a trust. So, for example, resident is becoming a beneficiary in an overseas trust, and resident is becoming we are looking at family trust, where probably discretionary, non-discretionary, or revocable, irrevocable. So if you are merely becoming beneficiary, as such, there is no reporting. However, whatever is the income that resident beneficiary earns, it must be repatriated back to India within 180 days. And if resident is settling property in a trust where NRIs are beneficiary, this is a kind of very gray area, and not much literature is available under FEMA. In fact, many representations have also been made to Reserve Bank, because these days one finds that every family or many Indians have got children, or there are family members who are non-resident Indian or OCI, and trust is being used widely to park the assets for better transfer and better control. But still a lot of gray area prevails with respect to this trust structure. And wherever there is a trust structure, it is better to take RBI into confidence, especially in these situations where your resident is settling properties in Indian trust which has got NRI beneficiaries. And there is only one reference available, which is in FEMA Master Direction number 13, which says that if it is a kind of irrevocable trust where resident is settling the property for good, and then it is amount to gift only, and whatever provisions that we have seen with respect to gift of shares or gift of immovable property, all that will apply. So I'm just making a passing reference that one has to be very, very clear with respect to gift or kind of settling property in a trust. Then you have change in the nature of transaction due to passage of time. So initially a transaction which was in the nature of current account transaction now turns into capital account transaction. So basically, if you look at the one second, yeah. So one will just have, before we move on to this, I'll just take you to slide 30, which deals with definition of current account transaction. So let's look at this and then we go back to the earlier slide. So current account transaction is a transaction other than a capital account transactions, and generally includes. So basically it is defined in negative way to say that whatever is not in the nature of capital, it will take the character of current account. Then it includes, so it is an inclusive definition, and it says payments due in connection with foreign trade, short-term banking and credit facility, payments due as interest on loan, remittance for living expenses of parent, and expenses in connection with foreign travel, education. So basically one would find that transaction is in the nature of current account, which does not result into creation of any asset or liabilities overseas. And India is a signatory to GATT, which is General Agreements on Trade and Tariff by WTO. And because of that, India is now fully opened up on current account transaction. So when you say fully opened up on current account transaction, means that any resident Indian, if he wants to draw foreign exchange, and if foreign exchange is required for current account transaction, generally there is no prohibition. So Reserve Bank will grant foreign exchange to the person who wants to draw foreign exchange. The example which I gave, that Narayan Murthy, where in 1980s, he had to go to RBI. There's no need for one to do so now, because India is now fully opened up on current account transaction. So if I want to import machinery, if I want to import service, or if I want to travel abroad, subject to limit maybe, but India is fully open on current account transaction, and therefore one can freely draw foreign exchange. Now let's look at the transaction, which is change in the nature of transaction due to passage of time. Now, generally, I've also received query also that, one would find that there are import dues. So import dues, the time limit for making payment of settling import is 6 months, and therefore import dues should be paid within 6 months from the date of shipment. And if you have got deferred payment arrangements, that is that, you are making your intention clear that I'm importing capital goods or goods, and I'll not be paying within 6 months, and therefore I enter into arrangement with overseas supplier or overseas banker who finances the transaction, and then that transaction can be financed up to 3 years or 5 years, and that is a kind of trade credit. So these are the two ways in which import transaction can be settled. If you are not doing that, and if you are even not seeking extensions of what the trade payable more than 6 months and up to 3 years are generally allowed by RBI. So even if you go to AD, if an Indian company was imported and you are not able to make payment, you will have to seek extension. You intimate to RBI that at the time limit of 6 months will not be fulfilled. These are the reasons, these are the financial difficulties, whatever is the reason, express your reasons in genuine manner and seek extension. And if that extension is obtained, generally up to 3 years, AD will permit you, but beyond that, it will take the character of deemed external commercial borrowing. And when you say ECB, it becomes a loan transaction and not a trade transaction, and therefore it will become a capital account transaction. And there are compounding orders dealing with this, where it has been held that this will be regarded as a capital account transaction. These are the compounding orders on outstanding fees. Now, it was import of services, delayed payment of import dues or fees for more than 6 months were treated as ECB. And this one can go through this compounding order, which are available on RBI website. I have also given here, but basically the point which is that one has to be very, very careful with import payable. The best part in while dealing with any such transaction, as an auditor also, one has to see that your communication with authorized dealer, your banker, is kept in a constant manner. The client must be told that please seek extension. Even if 6 months have expired, try to intimate authorized dealer. Take authorized dealer into confidence and keep on seeking extension, and that will save you from the rigor of this. And if required, they will take RBI approval also. And in genuine cases, one has to even write back the payable, it will require even RBI approval. Now look at the transactions which is in the look at whether I'm trying to raise a debt, but is it in the nature of capital account transaction or current account transaction? That is something known as a factoring. We also know that domestic factoring, where the invoices are factored and I realize my money immediately and I pay the interest. So factoring, whether factoring of export invoices, and I've taken the example to say that an interest rate is 5%. Why 5%? Because if you say ECB rate, which is maybe lower than that, external commercial borrowing, if I'm raising a borrowing, it is LIBOR plus 4.5% these days. And I'm assuming for a while that I'm discounting my export invoice, that is factoring, and the rate of interest is 5%, and whether it will amount to capital account transaction or not, in the sense that I'm raising a debt. The in this case, when you are trying to discount the export invoice by factoring, it will not amount to capital account transaction. Basically, the transaction which is underlying transaction is a current account transaction, because exported goods and there is no creation of asset or liabilities overseas. And instead of my debtor paying me the money, it is the factoring agency which is making me early payment subject to the finance charges or in the form of interest, based on the prevailing rate, that will be charged to me, or I'll be receiving lesser payment, and that is a permissible transaction. It will not be reserved, even though it is in the nature of borrowing, kind of working capital borrowing. Even there could be an outflow of interest, but still this will not be regarded as a capital account transaction. And there is a circular number 5 of July 16 2015, which says that this is a permissible transaction. Earlier the restrictions were that with recourse basis and non-recourse basis, in the sense that the factoring agent over non-resident factoring agent could have got recourse to Indian exporter to recover its money in case the ultimate customer has failed. But later on, there is a liberalization that if the factoring agent is comfortable and he is charging a higher rate of commission or higher rate of interest, and he bears the entire risk in case of even your customer not able to pay, even non-recourse basis is now permissible, and therefore factoring is the permissible mode of raising funds, and this is regarded as a current account transaction, even though it is in the nature of borrowing. We have already seen this current account definition, and this is what I already mentioned, that we are signatory to WTO, and therefore uh, there is no going back on this, and therefore what we look at is uh, basically we are open on current account transactions, but we are still not open on capital account transactions. I'll just spend few minutes on what is capital account convertibility. So we, as on date, India is not capital account convertible. There were 2 or 3 times the committees were appointed, and it was thought fit that after 1992, when India opened up its economy, and by the time, I think after a decade or so, the idea was mooted that India should now open on fully, India should be made fully capital account convertible. But the 2001, maybe the stock market scam, and then later on 2008 financial crisis, no country later on thought that it is prudent to open up the developing economies on capital account, and therefore India has still not opened up itself on capital account convertible in a limited way. When we look at the liberalized remittance scheme, we can say that we are partly or partially or in a limited way we are capital account convertible. What is capital account convertibility? Basically, the resident individuals as on date are granted a freedom that if you wish to convert your capital assets, which are your savings and assets in India, in rupee assets, if you wish to convert, you may convert it to foreign currency assets. So what I'll do, say for example, I find that I want to acquire shares of Tesla in US. It is a electric vehicle making company, and it is now becoming a big boom in the years to come. And therefore, I think that I wish to buy shares of Tesla. What I'll do, maybe I'll share my shares of Reliance in India, or I liquidate my other investments in India, and I go to my bank and say, give me dollar. Give me dollar. I want to now remit money US, and I want to acquire shares of Tesla. So this is what I have converted my Indian capital asset into a foreign currency asset, and this is what is known as a capital account convertibility. So we cannot afford, India cannot afford as on date to make fully convertible, because otherwise there is a probably it will happen that there will be run on uh, rupee, and therefore everybody would like to hold foreign currency asset, or maybe dollar itself. I can just hold it dollar. I mean, assume for a while that I would have bought dollar in 2014-15 at the rate of 60 to 63, and today it is quoting around 73. So there will be a risk on Indian economy, and therefore the Reserve Bank acts very cautiously, even though there was a lot of pressure from many international organization and a lot of liberal approach, where kind of trying to fasten India, that India should open up. But rightly so, the Reserve Bank has not done so, and its policies are in fact really prudent, and we were not at all impacted by 2008 financial crisis, which entire world had faced. Uh, as I mentioned, India is fully opened up on current account transaction. However, there are few restrictions, and therefore these restrictions are carved out in Schedule 1, 2, and 3. So these are current account rules, and Schedule 1 basically talks about very prohibited transactions. These are the transactions, for example, in the nature of gambling, or remittance of lottery winning, or basically any game of chance which you want to remit money. Today, even UK, for example, has got a betting in cricket or gambling in cricket official, but even under liberalized remittance scheme of $250,000, you cannot have you cannot take part in any such game of chance. So that is what we are saying, that we are fully opened up on current account. However, in the interest of the economy, and Reserve Bank has prudently carved out, this is a 3 schedules to say that these are scheduled 1 talks about prohibited transaction, Schedule 2 talks about transaction requiring prior approval of Government of India, and Schedule 3 talks about prior approval of RBI. So otherwise, most of the genuine transaction, one would find that it is doable. Then drawal of foreign exchange is prohibited for travel to Nepal and Bhutan, and because rupee is convertible there, and therefore it is prohibited. So this is how the current account rules are framed. Basically, one has to look at Schedule 1, 2, and 3, and if not, you can carry out the transaction. Yeah, so this is one slide which is on use of resident foreign currency account. What is RFC account? So when you say RFC account is a case where, non-resident is coming back to India and he doesn't want to, liquidate his foreign assets, he can continue to, as I mentioned, it will be a case of section 6(4). He can continue to own all the assets abroad which he has owned. But if he, for example, he has brought some funds to India, then these funds, or he has got funds in FCNR account, he has got funds in NRE account, these funds upon arrival to India can be shifted to RFC account. So it is mandatory for a person when it comes back to India and he declares his intention to settle in India, he would from that very day becomes resident Indian. And as a resident Indian, it is his obligation to, kind of close all NRE account, FCNR account and park that money to normal bank account. Now, if you are not doing that, then you can keep this, if you can keep this money into RFC account, that is resident foreign currency account. And this resident foreign currency account has got some of the benefits. You can use this money for your own, because you are retaining foreign currency in India, and you can use it for your own individual purposes. Schedule 1 we have already seen, and as I told you, even in terms of now this last bullet, the resident foreign currency account even cannot use this money for Schedule 1 transaction. So even if you are resident in India, you have got your foreign currency in RFC account or EFC account, still you cannot use or take participation in any of the game or gambling or any such activity which is listed in Schedule 1. Even technology collaboration with respect to game of chance, or it is not permissible. So, the lottery business, I was wondering, in the online lottery, when it was introduced some 15-20 years ago, when the online lottery started, there were few foreign companies making software, and those were kind of technologies were imported. But one would find that these technologies were imported, but there was no technology collaboration. When you say technology collaboration, it will usually have a kind of a royalty arrangement that, per transaction or per sale of unit, per unit sale, there will be some sort of compensation which will go to non-resident. But no such technological collaboration can also be taken, or even no trademark, brand name or something management contract cannot be undertaken with respect to lottery or any game of chance. Therefore, you find that, there is no such uh, investment possible. Now you look at the current scenario of Dreams 11. Dreams 11 is a company which has got foreign direct investment. Now, Dream 11 is the foreign. When you say foreign direct investment, that means non-resident investors have invested in the company, and now it is, and therefore there could be an issue. How then this transaction is permitted? Because you are trying to promote a game of chance. But what argument Dreams 11 had done it that it is not a gambling. There is a use of intellectual. There is a use of human brain to select the players, and accordingly, you are playing. It is not purely a game of chance. It is not purely a game of chance, and therefore they have come out in to say that it is not a game of chance and it is not kind of gambling, and therefore even the foreign direct investment is now permissible. We'll skip these slides because you can later on, even at leisure, you can go through what is the schedule to. Basically, this is schedule 2. One will have to approach respective ministry to seek the approval if the transaction is on current account, and if you are falling in this kind of transaction category, one will have to approach them and the approval may be granted. Then you have schedule 3. Basically, schedule 3 is the schedule which deals with day in and day out. We all might be dealing with this, and that is that, if you exceed the limit of transaction, one will have to go to RBI. So for example, individuals can make remittance within the limit of $250,000 for these facilities. Now, if you want to exceed your travel, your medical health or whatever, you will have to approach Reserve Bank and you will be granted approval. For example, many celebrities, one would find that they have been taking treatment overseas, in abroad for hospitals for very chronic diseases. And if you want to exceed, if you're likely to exceed the limit of $250,000, including your family members, probably you can approach Reserve Bank of India and you will be granted the approval. So Schedule 3 basically is now quite liberal limits. And if the limit is exceeded, one will have to approach RBI to seek withdrawal of foreign exchange. So it covers all the private visits, then gifts or donation, going abroad for employment, emigration, maintenance of close relatives, expenses in connection with medical treatment, studies abroad, or any other current account transaction. If you are within $250,000, you may use that. And this $250,000 limit, which is known as liberalized remittance scheme, it includes both capital as well as current account transaction. So I may use $250,000 even for acquisition of immovable property, and I may use it for even travel. So I'll have to generally, if we are buying a property and we tell the client that at least reserve $10,000-15,000 for immediate requirements. So don't use your full quota of $250,000 and reserve something, because then otherwise you will have to approach RBI even for current account transaction. Yeah. I think we can. Yeah. Now this is the facility for persons other than individuals. So this was mainly for individuals who are covered here. Even the current account transaction, as we know, then that we are fully open on current account. Even other corporates also can use this current account transaction even above the limit of $250,000. And so you have donations. This is what the limit is, and commission for per transaction to agents abroad for sale of residential flat or commercial plots in India exceeding USD 25,000 or 5% or inward remittance, whichever is more. So for example, there is a residential project going on in India, and somebody in UK, UK and US, a lot of Indian residents, NRIs, and somebody in UK is marketing this residential project of India, and he wants to earn commission. Then these are the limits. It says that commission per transaction to agents abroad for sale of residential flats or commercial plots in India exceeding USD 25,000 or 5% of inward remittance, whichever is more. So if non-resident is remitting amount worth 1 crore, maximum commission that could be paid is 5% of inward remittance or 25,000, whichever is more. Beyond that, one will have to approach RBI. And in fact, in 2007 and 8, I distinctly remember, we had a client where he said that, on UK FM, we were looking at some of the advertisement which was in respect of properties in India. And those were the kind of things which were being marketed, and you would have even earned commission on that. So this is what the limits are prescribed for this above transaction. Basically, the idea is that, we do not, Reserve Bank's intention dealing with the real estate transaction is quite conservative, that they do not want any speculative activity to creep in. And therefore, these are the limits. Every limit which usually RBI would put it will have some rationale. And if you look at the rationale and trying to understand the Reserve Bank mind, one would really appreciate the kind of philosophy with which Reserve Bank of India regulates and manages FEMA. Now, this is one more limit, which is in connection with consultancy. So remittances exceeding USD 10 million per project for any consultancy services in respect of infrastructure projects, and USD 1 million per project for other consultancy services procured from outside India. So if there is a project in India and one has to import the service, therefore I am looking at the, say for example, an international architecture firm, or there are project consultants, and therefore you have to remit money as a consultancy services, then this is the limit. So if it is an infrastructure project, the limit is per project. So it is 10 million per project. And if it is non-infrastructure project, the limit is USD 1 million per project. And as the language goes, it is per project, and therefore even if there are 4 consultants, but if it is in connection with one project, the limit of 10 million and 1 million will apply. And there is a compounding order dealing with this very facts in the case of Jaguar Buildcon Private Limited, where remittances exceeding 1 million to various consultants for single project, and it was led to contravention of FEMA, and it was compounded. I've given the list of infrastructure sector to say that, the limit of 10 million will apply and not 1 million. And this is what the list is. Then current account transaction dealing with pre-incorporation expenses. So for example, you are trying to set up a company in India. A foreigner, non-resident wants to, a foreign company or foreign group wants to establish a subsidiary in India. And therefore, when the subsidiary is set up, the initial pre-incorporation expenses are incurred by foreign company, then how will you remit back? So this is what the limit is. So it says remittances exceeding 5% of investment brought into India or USD 1 lakh, whichever is higher, for reimbursement of pre-incorporation expenses by entity in India. So that is quite possible that, the non-resident foreign parent or foreign group of company initially hires an office premises or any commercial space, and it places a deposit with landlord of that for office premises. You also incur all the legal expenses, the accountant fees to set up a company. and what is the limit when you want to remit it back. So this is the limit. Now, current account transactions are in the form of unincorporated joint ventures. Now, this is very interesting to say that, every time one would look at, for example, the film production, or for example, any joint venture where non-resident and resident, they want to collaborate, but they do not want to collaborate on either technical or even on financial collaboration. When you say financial collaboration, that means you are not entering into equity participation like Maruti Suzuki or initially Munjals of and Honda. So Hero Honda came. So you don't want kind of financial collaboration, nor you want any kind of technical collaboration. You just want to come out for a project maybe, and then you just want to separate it out. So you can have unincorporated joint ventures, and that could take a shape of what? It could be even technology transfer agreement. When you say technology transfer agreement, you are importing a technology and you are making a payment. This technology transfer agreement would be governed by foreign trade policy or DGFT rules, Directorate General of Foreign Trade. And if it is within that parameters, we will be able to have import technology subject to all the implications of custom duty and GST. And you carry out technology transfer agreement, you have joint product development agreement, you can have purchasing agreement, you can have distribution agreement, you can have marketing and promotional collaboration, or intellectual advice. In such a JV, the rights, duties and obligations of the parties are as between themselves. So you can define your understanding and you can come out. So every time it is not necessary that you have foreign direct investment in India, and this is also doable. And FEMA also recognizes this. So you can open an account in India also. The non-resident can have a joint venture account in India, and the current account transition for unincorporated joint ventures, you can have such account in India. The regulation 7 of FEMA notification 5R, this 5R basically deals with NRE, NRO, FCNR, and even this account, which is known as a SNRR account, that is special non-resident rupee account. So unincorporated joint venture of foreign companies or entities along with Indian entities for executing a contract in India may be allowed to open non-interest bearing foreign currency account and special non-resident rupee account. And it will be subject to the directions of Reserve Bank of India. This account shall be to undertake transactions in ordinary course of business by unincorporated JV and Indian entity. Debits and credit to the account shall be incidental to business requirement. Tenure of account shall be concurrent to the tenure of contract. And opening of accounts by companies or entities of Pakistan, Bangladesh will require prior approval. So basically, the FEMA does recognize that, and one can have such account in the form of SNRR account. Say, for example, metro project, say for Metro Delhi, and there's a non-resident collaborator or non-resident technology provider, and there could be an Indian, maybe state government owned company or central government owned company, and they can collaborate. They can have SNRR account without any equity participation. Non-resident will remit funds to India to undertake the payments in connection with local procurement or whatever. And therefore, upon completion of the project, you may exit India and close the account. Current account transactions dealing with royalty and lump sum fees. I'm just typically taking this slide because there were restrictions prior to 2009, and there were restrictions on payment of royalty. But nowadays there are no such restrictions, and therefore any nature of royalty in the nature, see the limits which were earlier. I'm looking at the second last bullets in italics. The remittances under technical collaboration agreement where payment of royalty exceeds 5% on local sales and 8% on export and lump sum payment exceeding 2 million. This was the limit which was there up to 2009 16 December, and beyond that the royalty were not payable. So 5% on domestic sale and 8% on export sale. Beyond that the royalties were not payable. But now no such limits are there, and India is now fully allowing payment of royalty of whatever percentage based on commercial prudence. If it is exorbitantly high and if there is a mola fide intention and if AD notices it, there could be some inquiry, but otherwise on a genuine transaction, there are no such limits. Basically, Reserve Bank has been becoming liberal with the experience, with the maturity, and with the buoyancy in foreign exchange. Today we are sitting on ample foreign exchange, and therefore as and when we have realized that India is becoming more and more healthier on foreign exchange, the limits on whatever limits were there are being shrinked, or wherever possible they are being liberalized, or therefore limits are at times removed, and this is one such classic example. One more way of raising funds, or one more nature of current account transaction, is advance against export of goods. And this is what is permissible transaction. You can receive advance against export of goods, and advance against export of goods can be received by an exporter from a buyer or third party whose name is appearing in export declaration form. Even interest can be paid on that. Interest can be paid on this advance payment, and which rate of interest will not exceed LIBOR plus 100 basis point. The condition is that shipment of goods should be made within 1 year from the date of receipt of advance. And in case of advance against export of services, there is no specific inward remittance purpose code, and hence poses practical difficulty. Now, this is very really posing a difficulty, and I'm just for practical experience I'll share here that there is quite possible that in many of the transaction where we have holding subsidiary relationship, and India is a subsidiary and kind of back office operation, and most of the time billing would be in the form of cost plus model. You have cost plus markup, and you bill to your parent and you receive money. Now, if you are trying to raise, say, for example, we had a case where the pattern of billing was in the beginning of the quarter. So there were 4 invoices during the year. And in the beginning of the quarter, invoice was raised, and the client wrote, advance against export of services. The moment you write advance against export, there is no category with Reserve Bank, and it's in terms of describing the nature of inward remittance, and therefore advance against export usually partakes the character of advance against export of goods only. And this poses a real big challenge, because then there are no real export of goods which are taking place in India, because you are a service oriented company. You are maybe a kind of either BPO or software development company, and therefore there is nothing like export of goods, and this remains outstanding in the records of bank. So your advance against export would remain outstanding against in the records of what we call EDPMS, export data process management system, and it will never be knocked off. And later on there were reminders from bank that please show document that where you have exported, and all this poses a difficulty. So in case of advance against export of services, my advice is that one should treat it as export only and proceed, because for Reserve Bank purposes this is what is real difficulty is, because they do not have the system to capture advance against export of services. Yeah. Now, deposit given by NRI for acquiring immovable property on rental, is it a current account transaction or not? So the issue is that this non-resident is giving a deposit to a resident landlord. There is a bungalow or there's an apartment in say New Delhi, and NRI wants to use it for leave and license basis or for lease of say less than 5 years. Because if it is lease of 5 years or more, it amounts to the transaction in the nature of acquisition of immovable property. So you non-resident, the Indian resident as a landlord, it is getting a deposit. Now, if you say non-resident has otherwise created an asset, if you strictly go by the definition, because this deposit is a refundable deposit, and upon expiry of the tenure, resident will be repaying it back. So, but the deposit is given as a security for the purpose of occupying the immovable property, and therefore it is not in the nature of capital account transaction, but it takes the nature of current account transaction. So even deposit given by NRI, and there's no direct reference to it, but the reference I'm drawing from APDS Circular 59, which is in connection with director placing a deposit. It says that keeping deposits with an Indian company by a person resident outside India in accordance with Section 160 of Companies Act is a current account transaction, and as such does not require any approval from Reserve Bank. All refunds of such deposit arising in the event of selection of the person as director or getting more than 25 so and so shall be treated similarly. So basically, if there is an underlying transaction which is in the form of securing the interest by a resident, the transaction will not be regarded as a capital account transaction, and you can freely accept deposit from non-resident Indian without any sort of compliance, both by non-resident as well as resident. Now let's look at some of the transaction which would get converted to capital account. So conversion of current account transaction to capital account transaction. So you have paragraph 1D of schedule 1 of non-debt instrument rules 2019, which deals with foreign direct investment. As I mentioned, the power to deal with equity or foreign direct investment or portfolio investment now shifted to central government, and in pursuance of that, we have non-debt instrument rules 2019. And here is a classic case of the transaction which is originally a current account transaction, but then later on can be converted to capital account. And what is that? So it says issue of shares against import of capital goods or machinery or equipment or pre-incorporation expenses. So the import of goods or machinery or equipment or pre-incorporation expenses, this was in the nature of current account transactions. Instead of repaying it back, I want to issue now shares against that, and that is permissible. And it will be regarded as it will then turn into a capital account transaction. So paragraph 1E of Schedule 1 of FEMA NDA rules also states that shares can be issued against any funds payable, remittance of which does not require prior approval of Reserve Bank of India or government. Or example of any other funds payable could be payment for use or acquisition of intellectual property right, for import of goods, payment of dividends or interest payment, consultancy fees, etc. So this is where, other than the import of goods, also some of the funds which are payable, and it can be converted to equity capital to non-resident. Then change in the nature of, we continue with this, change in the nature of capital account transaction. The earlier slide dealt with the change in the nature of capital account, change in the nature of transaction from current to capital. Here is a case where we are within the capital account transaction, we are looking at change. So conversion of loan to equity. So conversion of external commercial borrowing to equity shares. The activity of borrowing company, if it is in the nature of which is under automatic route of foreign direct investment, then you can convert loan to equity and subject to compliance with foreign direct investment guidelines, and that is doable. So if it is an ECB and subject to that non-resident qualifying as a non-proper investor, and the activity of the Indian company, if it is under automatic route, it can be converted to equity. In case of overseas direct investment, conversion of loan to equity is under automatic route, whereas conversion of equity to loan will require prior approval. So this is what one has to bear in mind. And recently we are having a case where we are really facing a difficulty, because due to oversight, when the remittances were made from India, the box which was checked or box which was ticked was kind of equity investment, but the foreign company has treated it as a debt. And therefore in the balance sheet of subsidiary, it is appearing as a debt, whereas the Indian companies forms which are there, which have been submitted to Reserve Bank and been turned through authorized dealer, are showing it as a equity. Now there's a mismatch, though amounts are matching, but the equity and debt portion is changing, and this leads to again a lot of confusion. So in case of wind up, in case of closure of foreign company, all these issues crop up and then leads to unnecessarily delay, and delay leading to then compounding. Friends, I've tried to summarize some of the capital and current account transactions and the lot of issues which are there in connection therewith. If there are any questions, I can take it up this right. So first question is, can a NRI gift his property situated in India to his resident brother? Is there any permission required and fair market value guidelines? So if it is a property which is situated in India and NRI wants to gift, it is permissible transaction. Does not require any reporting also. There is no requirement of any reporting. Non-resident brother can gift a property to resident. Yeah. FEMA will not look at the relationship for so far as property is concerned. Yeah. How much US dollars resident Indian can keep in cash? See, basically, when you are looking at holding dollars in cash, one has to understand, like Section 5 of Income Tax Act, which says that any income which is accruing or arising to a resident Indian, the global income is taxable, right? We say that, income wherever arising across the globe, it is taxable in India. Similarly, whatever is a foreign exchange due to a resident Indian, it is the duty of resident Indian to bring back such foreign exchange to India and surrender it to authorized dealer or a bank and exchange for rupee. So if you are earning foreign exchange, you cannot hold it. Basically, the limit is given of $2,000. That is only with respect to purchase of foreign exchange where you are traveling abroad, and if you are unable to use the full amount of foreign exchange dollar of basic travel quota, say for example for business trip, you are allowed, for example, 25,000. I'm not knowing the exact limit, but say for 25,000 is what is allowed. And on my return, I just spent 15,000. I bring back the $10,000. If it is a $10,000, I have to compulsorily surrender 8,000. What I can hold is only 2,000, not beyond that. So the fundamental principle is that foreign exchange is the property of central government. As I mentioned, we are not currency convertible country, neither we are capital account convertible country, and therefore you cannot hold dollars beyond 2000. Yeah. That also in the form of currency, traveler's check and all that. I mean, generally one will not hold currency, but otherwise foreign exchange moment it is due to you. So there are two ways. One is your earnings in foreign exchange, and other is you have purchased the foreign exchange and not spent it. So the limit of 2000 applies to the transaction of purchase of foreign exchange for going abroad for current account transactions, and having unspent that you hold it because you may use it again to travel again next visit, and therefore there will be exchange loss or transaction cost to you. But otherwise you are not supposed to, whatever is the earnings in foreign exchange, you have to immediately realize and repatriate back to India. That is section 8 of FEMA, and notification 9 are dealing with realization and repatriation. Can a NRI gift shares of foreign company to an Indian resident? I think we already covered this in the presentation that yes, it is doable. Please clarify gift of shares of domestic company by R2NR. Is it covered by general permission? No, it is not covered by general permission. Resident to non-resident transfer of shares is approval route, and there are very stringent conditions. It is under approval route, and that too with limit of $50,000 in the value. So recently we had a case where we are, in fact, there was a case where the client came up with a request that, brother wants to give the shares to sister, amounted to around 5.5% stake of a company. And upon further discussion with the client, it transpired that actually the brother was holding the shares as a nominee. The father had expired, and since father had expired, these shares had come to the brother by way of nomination. So the sister had put up a claim that I also want a share. So accordingly, then we thought that, why not to treat this transaction as an inheritance? It is nothing actually, because brother is not real sense gifting the shares, but it could be regarded as an inheritance. And then we suggested client to come out with either family settlement deed or release deed. And then if you can treat the transaction as inheritance, then it will not require approval. But otherwise, yes, the gift of resident by resident to non-resident is under approval. Can a US citizen who is resident in India under FEMA, US citizen who is resident in India under FEMA receives a gift of an agricultural land from a person resident and Indian citizen? If you are not an Indian citizen, then receipt of gift of agricultural land would pose a problem. I think it is only allowed to Indian citizen. There are other state laws also which does not allow non-Indian citizen, even though you could be a NRI or NRI, I mean, you could be OCI, like in this case, he is a US citizen who may be resident. So first fact, you will have to find out whether he is a OCI or not. I assume that he is an OCI, but still I think he will not be allowed to hold or continue with agricultural land. If you are, but one has to go to RBI, ask for approval. In all probability, Reserve Bank will not grant the approval, and it either tell them to sell the land to a resident Indian who is citizen of India. That is what the issue is. I mean, we had a case where US NRI, I mean US based NRI had bought. He was Indian, continued to be Indian citizen, but he had bought the land, which turned out to be an agriculture, and he had some other plans of carrying out a dairy business, and therefore he wanted that land as a part of his business venture. But then the transition was compounded, and upon sale the entire capital gain was treated as a compounding fee, and that is what the situation is. So take a prior approval, and in all probability, as I mentioned, RBI would want the transition of this land to be sold to resident India. Wanted to know what will be the penalty or interest if compliance default under FEMA due to pandemic, if import payments are not made within the stipulated time under 6 months, and if export payments are not within. I think the time limit has been extended for
imports done on or up to 31st July 2020. It is 9 months.
So only up to July, whatever the imports done July 20, imports till July 20, the time limit is extended to 9 months. And export is 15 months. But if you are unable to make payment, the first and foremost thing would be that you have to write to authorized dealer, keep taking an extension, as I told you, intimate banker, and if banker wants, they will approach trade division or Reserve Bank and seek appropriate extension. If you are seeking extension, no issue, and up to 3 years, as I told you, you may get in this situation of pandemic and due to business disruptions. I think the approach should be can be easily obtained. Yeah. In case of gift IFSC company,
Remittance of sale proceeds of
sorry, is remittance of sale proceeds of shares or dividend income by trust to NR beneficiaries considered as a current account transaction? Transaction is definitely a current account transaction because it is in the nature of income. However, if the trust, uh, firstly it will run through the test of authorized dealer, because nowadays authorized dealers have really become awakened, and every remittance they have been questioning the details, and if the shares which are held by the trust on behalf of as a beneficiary were non-residents, if those are FDI compliant shares, there should not be issue. But I think it is quite possible that AD may raise the questions about the transaction. But yeah, otherwise transaction is in the nature of current account transaction. Yes. In case of gift IFSC company with USD as a functional currency and incurring expense through SNRR account in Indian rupee, SNRR account does not permit any credit other than currency conversion. As such, how can the company receive security deposit on tenders, any recoveries from employee, etc.? Mm, Special non-resident rupee, you are able to receive credit of and receive security deposit on tenders, any recoveries from employees. I think intimate to AD, and I think this both should be permissible. Of course, it will, since it is not directly given, the so I'm just trying to look at the provisions related to. So I think if you look at notification dealing with SNRR, it talks about two kind of credit, which is says INR amount from sale of scrap or government incentives in INR, etc. So these are the two things which they are referring to. In my view, if tender deposit is also in connection with normal course of business and therefore intimate to AD, this should be immediately doable. I don't see any challenge, big challenge on this.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
These days, Singapore holdco structures are being used by angels for investment where the operating or associate companies are in India. Any specific issues, if you could touch, please, in terms of words of caution, investment in the Singapore holdco. See, only thing it should not. The first and foremost is when you're looking at a holding company structure overseas, and like overseas direct investment, one has to really look at firstly whether it is resulting into round tripping or not. So if you are holding companies in Singapore, and in turn you are trying to make investment into India, direct investment through Singapore, then that is first and foremost thing, that it should not result into ODI to FDI structure, basically resulting into round tripping. And now we also have a FAQ on overseas direct investment provisions, which clearly spells out that this should not take place. And secondly, if you're investing in holding company structure as a under a liberalized remittance scheme, probably you can do so, provided that company should not have step down investment if you're doing an individual structure. If there's an Indian company making investment in Singapore holding company and then you have step down investment, no issue. So other than individual, maybe this is not an issue, but as an individual, if you are making, you cannot have step down operating entities. You cannot, individual also cannot invest in financial services company under LRS ODI structure. You can make a small investment as an angel investor, but otherwise if you're making an ODI, so LRS and ODI is a different for individual, and making a pure portfolio investment is a separate issue. So if somebody is entering into portfolio investment, yes, but otherwise these are the precautions. One, that no round tripping. Another would be avoid financial services company if you are as investing as an individual and you are holding a board membership or directorship, then it is definitely a business investment and not a portfolio investment. Can an Indian resident buy stake in a foreign company? This is already answered, though you are allowed to buy stake in the foreign company. Individual also subject to limit of $250,000. As a overseas direct investment, you can definitely buy, and subject to filing of forms with Reserve Bank through your banker. And if you are holding as a portfolio investment, especially listed of mutual fund units or even foreign listed shares, you can do so. So that is not an issue. First, decide the nature of investment. Is it in the nature of business investment? You want to set up a company, you want to hold majority stake, you want to run the company, that can be also be done. That is not an issue. Subject to reporting requirement with Reserve Bank as per notification 120. You'll have to file form ODI. Can an Indian company remit in foreign currency to a foreign company for supply of goods made by Indian subsidiary of foreign supplier? So what is the structure? An Indian company is there which wants to remit in foreign currency to a foreign company for supply of goods made by Indian subsidiary of foreign supplier. So if Indian subsidiary is supplying to in India only, that is what I understand. So basically it is a domestic transaction of supply. The only invoicing is being done by foreign company. I think this will require approval of banker and in turn maybe RBI, because these are the type of transactions which are now increased. We are facing a situation where there is a commission payable to non-resident for sale of goods in India itself. So there is no overseas sale. So basically there are, and this type of transactions are happening in case of, outsourcing of production, or many things are happening. If the delivery is in India and not affected overseas, and if one wants to even make commission payment or this type of payment, it is the transaction will have to be explained to AD, and based on genuineness on a case-to-case basis, AD will allow the transaction. Otherwise, this can pose problem. The first question was, can an NRI returning back to India and status getting changed to resident retain the bank account in foreign country? This was already discussed by me. There is a section 6(4) of FEMA. So 6(4) and 6(4) are like, section 10 of Income Tax Act, which says that income is exempt, it even doesn't form part of computation. Similarly, 6(4) assets, which a resident holding overseas, while he was non-resident, he can continue to own all the assets. So section 6(4), it says a person resident in India may hold, own, transfer or invest in foreign currency, foreign security or any immovable property outside India if such currency, security, property was acquired, held or owned by such person when he was resident outside India. So NRI returning back to India can retain bank account foreign currency even after his status getting changed to resident of India. Subject to full disclosure under income tax and all other compliances, you can continue. Master Direction number 19, that is miscellaneous remittances, also refers to this, that foreign currency account opened and maintained by person when he was resident outside India can be continued. Can he, sub-part of the question, can he also receive foreign exchange in that account for services rendered from India? Now this is, once you write that services are rendered from India, you cannot park your foreign exchange in that bank account. The overseas bank account is only for the passive income which you have generated there. I mean the capital or investment which is there. On that, whatever passive income you are earning, you can park it there. But active income which you are rendering from services from India, that has to be brought back to India. As I mentioned, there is section 8 of FEMA, which mandates to realize and repatriate. So realize is to first realize the funds, that you have to take all reasonable steps to realize the foreign exchange. And upon realization, it is the obligation to repatriate back to India. So no excuse from that. But you can have RFC domestic account. If you wish to park these earnings into RFC domestic account, you can. But again, as I have written here, this will not even give you the idea, exceed the limit of $250,000 for overseas investment. You can just hold it for under RFC domestic account, but nothing beyond that. So repatriation to India is a mandatory. The next question is, what are the provisions relating to LRS and 15C and CB? So the liberalized remittance scheme, as I told you, it's a permissible capital account transaction. Under that notification 1, there is a regulation which is the legal support for that. And this is nothing but a kind of capital account convertibility. You can use that scheme for capital account transaction also, as well as for current account transaction. And 250,000 is a per financial year limit. And 15C and CB as such, if you are making an investment, there is section 195(6) of Income Tax Act read with rule 37BB. Now 37BB says, sub rule 3 says that no information is required to be furnished for any sum which is not chargeable to Income Tax Act of the provision. And these are the subset of rules under that, for which 15C and CB is not required to be filed. In fact, the rule 3 gives a list of 33 items for which there is no need to, file 15 CB, maybe just reporting in 15 CA. And this is few examples of 33 items are Indian investment abroad in equity capital, debt securities, Indian investment abroad in real estate, remittances toward business, education, medical travel, etc. So all these type of 33 items are there, which does not require any reporting. And no prior approval of RBI. Then you have, can you highlight the foreign currency term loan scheme? An Indian resident borrower wants to avail this scheme for working capital purpose. Is it possible to avail FCTL against exports earnings in euro? So foreign currency borrowing is nothing but ECB, and this is governed by regulation 3R, notification 3R, and you have master direction on ECB. And there's a detailed master direction. Basically, ECB is governing this broad parameters. Who could be eligible borrower? So whether you have to examine whether Indian entity is eligible borrower or not. Who could be eligible lender? For example, working capital in case of if it is coming from shareholder, that shareholder must own 25% equity. So that is the classification of eligible lender. Minimum tenure of loan. ECB is usually for a longer period, at least 3 years to 5 years, and therefore that will be minimum tenure. Then what is the currency of loan? It is rupee loan or even foreign currency loan. Then purpose of loan, is it working capital or capital expansion? And the rate of interest, which is known as the all-in cost. So these are the parameters which you do one or two, and all the parameters has to be duly complied with. One has to file form to obtain loan registration number, and upon obtaining of the LRN, loan registration number, then loan can be drawn. Indian company can borrow for working capital subject to certain detailed guidelines and compliance. As I told you, if it is coming from shareholder, that shareholder must own 25% equity, and the tenure can be minimum tenure has to be 5 years. Then it cannot be 3 years. So there is a detailed guideline available, but yeah, the transaction of borrowing is possible. Yes. A resident Indian has purchased residential premises in Europe under LRS nearly 5 years ago, jointly with his wife, who also contributed to the cost of the house under LRS. Can the house be gifted to the daughter residing in the US? This can be done, but with prior approval of RBI. And you may get the approval also. That should not be an issue. But yeah, it will require approval. There is no blanket approval, or there is no general permission. If so, acquired to report to the RBI in process involved. Since prior approval of RBI is, yeah, so if you are taking RBI approval, it will automatically get captured. There's no need to, and the application will be to RBI New Delhi office. Alternatively, can the resident individual sell the house and retain the amount overseas? Yeah, I mean, there is no restriction. It is your own wish to buy or sell. So you can do that. No issue with respect to buying or selling. And amount also can be retained overseas, because this is a remittance which is made under LRS. This is not earnings in foreign exchange. So if you are remitted under LRS and you are liquidating your investment of the present form and you want to reinvest somewhere else, those funds can be retained overseas. But you cannot open a bank account overseas and try to keep it there. If you are opening a bank account overseas, there is a separate guidelines available for maintaining foreign currency account, where there could be you can have branch overseas, or you want to have a place of business overseas. There is a separate guideline available. Otherwise, your earnings has to be brought back. But LRS investment, risk investment of LRS money can be retained overseas. If the amount is allowed to be retained overseas, is it required to inform RBI? No, there is no need to report RBI with respect to this disinvestment proceeds. Trade transactions of delay in import and export due to financial cases. I think I have already dealt with it, that you please try to intimate authorized dealer and seek proper extension. And the time limit is extended for this thing, and take approval. Delay in repayment of interest and principal of ECB. I think if it is going likely to be delay in principal of ECB, you know well in advance that there is going to be delay. So ask for the enhancement in ECB with proper prior intimation, and maybe this there could be either new LRN or maybe the same LRN with new terms and condition can be given. And even interest, if it is likely to be delayed, one has to write to AD, taken approval, because interest beyond 3 years will also then take the character of ECB, and this is what is the danger. So therefore, if it is delayed of payment of interest based on the agreement, whatever is the tenure, half yearly, yearly, or whatever moratorium you have, if you are going to delay beyond the agreement terms, it is better to write to AD. If required, AD will take RBI approval. Whether director's credit card can be used to pay online for purchase of software, etc. from outside India for the company, precautions to be taken for business visit abroad. Whether the director can use his credit card for incurring expenditure like traveling, conveyance, and food. See, there is a reference to use of credit card for import of goods, and that is available in para B.43 of Master Direction on Import of Goods and Services. So there is no notification on import of goods, but there is a Master Direction on Import of Goods and Services. And we have reproduced that paragraph, which says that a person resident in India may make payment for import of goods in foreign exchange through an international credit card held by him. So now the language says that, held by him. So either the importer himself should own the card. Now, if director is using his card, probably it is better that, these facts are explained to authorized dealer that this is the director who is going to use the credit card, and let him only sign the charge slip, which is for the purpose of import. And with the intimation to AD, this should be doable. Director using his own credit card to make travel expenses should not be an issue. You can take a reimbursement from company later on, but that can be done for travel. No issue with that. Residential status of student studying abroad. Can he purchase the house property outside India? Can a student take a loan from non? This is really a area where there is a lot of ambiguity, and even after 20 years of FEMA, still there is not much clarity, because the definition of FEMA dealing with person resident in India and person resident outside India is silent with respect to student. It's envisages three situations. One is person living abroad for employment, person living abroad for business or vocation, and third situation is person living abroad in such circumstances which leads to uncertainty, with respect to his overseas stay. So these three situations are envisaged, but there is nothing for student, and therefore the only reference available under FEMA is this circular number 45 of way back of December 8, 2003. Now this is the circular which describes the position of student, and it also doesn't very assertively make any clarity. It only says that, looking at the situation that, today's students are also likely to take up some apprenticeship or some sort of part-time job and other things, and therefore, and their stay will also be in the nature of uncertain period, and therefore they can be treated as an NRI. Now they use the word they can be. They're not saying they shall be or they may be. So it is ultimately kind of a choice which is given to student himself to decide what is his intention. And as mentioned, as the concept of FEMA for deciding residency is not the only physical state, it is mainly deals with intention. So if the intention of the student in the time when you're trying to decide, if his intention is to stay overseas and after even completion of study, if he feels that, I'm likely to take job there and there are circumstances indicating such thing, he can be treated as an NRI. If he is treated as NRI, then he can repatriate funds from India up to $1 million, that is $10 lakh every year. So if he can liquidate his Indian investments, and out of these funds, he can take it back to his country where he's studying, and he can buy the property there. If he is treated as a resident, still under liberalized remittance scheme, he can take up $250,000 and buy property out of it. So buying a property is not an issue. In fact, there is a reference to with respect to loan also, if he wants to take up an education loan. So that is also given in regulation 4B6 of notification 3R, which deals with borrowing in foreign currency. It says that an individual who is resident in India studying abroad. So see how the language is worded. You are resident in India studying abroad. So this notification says that you are kind of resident and you're studying abroad. So under income tax, you may be non-resident. For FEMA, you can be resident, and you can take a loan not exceeding $250,000 for payment of education fees abroad and for maintenance. So this is what is possible. You can even raise foreign currency borrowing. The advantages of treating student as a resident would be under FEMA that, you need not change all your bank account from normal savings account to NRO NRE account. If you are making your intention clear that I want to call myself as non-resident, then correspondingly the bank account in India of student will also have to undergo change out to NRO NRE. If there are any investments in India like mutual fund, you will have to intimate that I have become NRI, and those will become the non-repeatable investment. The TDS applicable under income tax as such on the interest and other thing would be very high, but otherwise all the precautions under FEMA mainly with respect to conversion of bank account also should be undertaken simultaneously if you are making your intention to qualify as a non-resident Indian. In case company has not received export sale proceeds within 6 months, do we have to report in our audit report? Will it be termed as a FEMA violation? So again, to clarify, the due date or the time limit for realization of export is not 6 months, it is 9 months. And for exports up to July 2020, it is 15 months. So that is the extended time limit which you have to first check out. If export proceeds are not received within specified time limit, the obligation of exporter is to intimate AD Bank and seek the extension. So if extension is sought, and that extension authorized dealer can grant for additional period of 6 months. And if that extension is sought and you are signing your audit report within that period, I think the obligation is not there for any sort of, then it is not a contravention at all. And therefore, I don't think there should be any reporting. If proceeds are even not received, even after seeking extension of AD and after intimation, if required, the idea should now be to seek an approval of RBI for extension. So if there are genuine cases and all the efforts are made in terms of if there could be possibility of taking any legal action against the overseas debtor, so whatever documentation that you can generate, that has to be created and submitted to AD, who in turn can seek approval of RBI. If that is not done, then the question could be that, whether as an auditor you should qualify or not. If extension is sought from RBI, or if even application is pending before RBI, then you have as an auditor, I think you have a valid document available that you may state that, application for extension to RBI is made and it is awaiting approval. If approval is rejected, there is no choice. But if it is not, then of course, I think you will have to take a call whether it is an item of significance. But my colleague Viral could find out that, there was under the code of ethics, the ICAI has introduced reporting for non-compliance of law and regulation, NOCLAR, in a revised code of ethics, whereby a CA is required to issue report of compliance of various relevant laws applicable to a company wherever he comes across during the course of audit. Now, the new code of ethics with respect, which was to be implemented from July 20, however, due to pandemic, it has now been deferred. So this is where the institute's guidance note with respect to code of ethics on the auditor's role is given. But in my view, if you are seeking an extension of AD or RBI, that should be sufficient. If not, and if amount is material, if it is to related party, it is better to draw the significance or maybe qualify, depending upon the facts. I think this was the last question. Yeah.
Thank you, Manojji.
Yeah.
Excellent session.
Thank you.
Thank you for explaining the current and capital account transactions in a lucid manner. You dealt the subject with many practical examples and with lots of clarity. You answered all the questions raised by the members. Members are really very benefited actually. And I now request Deputy Convener C. Krishna Kumarji present vote of thanks to the speaker.
Thank you, Seemaji, for giving this opportunity. Today's topic, current and capital account transaction under FEMA and related issue by CA Manoj Saji has very well been covered the topic. Mr. Shah had covered the topic in very detailed manner and answered the queries of all the participants. In fact, there were more than 30-40 queries, which in very detailed manner he had answered. On behalf of JB Nagar CP Study Circle, I propose a hearty vote of thanks for such a wonderful session, and thank you, Manojji, for sparing the time and in enhancing the knowledge of the participants. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. Really very nice.